Hi, my name is Mary Hamilton French. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a conservation officer here at the Boston Public Library in Special Collections. As a book conservator here at the BPL, my primary work is to do hands-on conservation treatments of rare books, manuscripts, maps, fine works of art on paper, and anything that could kind of come through special collections that's within my area of expertise. I got into conservation when I was in college. My college was lucky enough to have a book arts lab, which taught printing and bookbinding and papermaking workshops. And from there, I really fell in love with it. They had a conservation lab that hired student employees, and I decided that that was what was really exciting to me, and I wanted to make that my career. And so after college, I went to England, where I did a master's degree in conservation studies. Worked over in England at Cambridge University Library for a few years before moving back to the US. I previously worked for the Northeast Document Conservation Center, which did a lot of contract work for the Boston Public Library, and so I knew what an incredible collection we had here. And when this job came up, I was just so excited to get the chance to work more with these materials, so I applied, and here I am. In my previous job, I used to do a lot of associates funded work that was contracted out from the Boston Public Library. And I just got so excited working on those materials. They were truly incredible. And so truly, the associates are responsible for why I'm here today. One of my favorite projects that I've worked on throughout my entire conservation career was an associates funded project. It was a manuscript from the late 15th century on the life of St. Augustine, and it has all of these really beautiful painted miniatures. However, the paint was actually causing the paper underneath it to degrade so severely that it was cracking and it was completely inaccessible. But it was also a very culturally significant and religiously significant manuscript because it contained a lot of anecdotes of St. Augustine's life that were not found recorded elsewhere in literature. So I did several hundred hours of work to piece by piece and paper fiber by paper fiber piece these pages back together. And so as you can imagine, that took a very long time, but thankfully there was the support from the associates to do that. Right now I'm working on the Women's Era, which is a newspaper that was published in the late 19th century in America. It's notable for being the first newspaper published by and for Black women. It's one of our most frequently requested materials, and unfortunately, because they were made of newspaper, they're really fragile and really brittle. So we wanted to make sure that these materials were accessible for many years to come. One of the ways that we can do this is to put the newspaper leaves in what is known as an encapsulated post binding. We use an ultrasonic welder, which you can see right here, and that uses sound waves to weld together sheets of mylar around all four edges, and then this means that they're a lot less susceptible to damage. And then these pockets are used to house the newspaper materials. After that, these materials were digitized, and so these will be available publicly. And then the next step is to actually bind these, and then they'll be ready for patron access again. So usually when I do treatments, I don't get to read these materials, but every now and then something will catch your eye. It's been particularly interesting seeing a lot of discussions about women's rights to vote and how they can advocate for themselves in an era when there were often a lot of restrictions on their rights. So it's really incredible to have this space that was so focused on women's thoughts. It wasn't censored, and they could kind of get all of these thoughts and emotions and ideas out on paper, which is just really exciting and really empowering. This project that I'm going to be showing to you is one of the many medieval manuscripts that we have in our collections here. It also has a really unusual feature, which are these little silk curtains that were stitched to the pages. And these curtains are to protect the painted miniatures underneath. Unfortunately, over time, these curtains crumpled up, so they're starting to abrade the surface of the miniatures. This book was a candidate for digitization, and so the curator asked me to see if I could humidify and flatten them. I'm using a material called Gore-Tex, and the breathable capabilities of the fabric mean that it is capable of transmitting a small and controlled amount of moisture. I do what's called masking off of all the other areas of the parchment with polyester sheeting. You probably know this as mylar. However, this comes with a little bit of static cling. This could move the paint on the surface of the page. So I then need to mask the mylar off with something that is not staticky. So I use a piece of paper or cardstock to help prevent that static cling. And then I add what's called a moisture reserve. The moisture reserve is basically some blotter saturated with filtered water, and that's going to provide the humidification. And then on top of that, I put another sheet of mylar, and then on top of that, paper again, and then I close the book and let it humidify. It can take a variable amount of time. In this case, it's so thin, it usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And then after that, the process is complete. There are so many things that I love about this job. first and foremost for me is getting to make a difference in these books and objects' lives. Often when these arrive at my workbench, they're inaccessible, they're not able to be used by patrons and by the general public, and ultimately these books are meant to be read. And so what I get to do is ensure that these will be around for future generations, which is really exciting to me. I also love the hands-on aspects of this work. It's so much fun to have this really tangible thing that I can look at the end of the day and say, I did that. I get to be a part of this object's life. I also really love getting to see objects up close and personal that would normally be in a museum, perhaps behind glass. It just makes history come alive for me. Finally, I really love specifically working here because I get to interact with the general public. When people come to the reading room, sometimes they'll have conservation questions, and so I get to go next door and answer them, talk with them a little bit more, and it's just so much fun to see their connections with the materials. We're so lucky to have such incredible materials here in special collections at the Boston Public Library. And often these materials have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're really precious to people. People really connect with them. And quite often, when these materials have been around for so long and have this significant impact on people over time, they're often falling into disrepair. So they're starting to degrade, they're breaking down. And we want to make sure that they're around for future generations to preserve that knowledge and also that piece of cultural history. And so the associates have been really wonderful about funding a lot of projects related to materials in our special collections. They also fund my position, and that makes it possible for me to work on these incredible materials. Quite often, our most degraded materials require a significant amount of work, and so that requires a significant amount of person hours. And so having the funding to do that is really essential.